like to call to order the special meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education for Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. Board members may attend and participate in board meetings by electronic means in accordance with BVSD policy, BMEA, and state law. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez.
Here.
Medler.
Here.
Misnick. Quinlan Oeda.
Here.
Raj Paul.
Here.
Sargent.
Here.
Unger. Thank you.
I'd like to turn it over to Lelania, who will read our land acknowledgement this morning.
Boulder Valley School District resides and operates on land that is the ancestral homeland and unjustly and illegally taken territory of the Ute, Puebloan, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Apache, Navajo, and 48 other tribal nations historically tied to this land, who have called this land home since time immemorial. We acknowledge the atrocities committed here, including the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and efforts to alienate the indigenous inhabitants from their homeland, supported by the policies of the United States government. BVSD is aware of the many indigenous peoples, past and present, and their dignified nations and cultures who care for the land with strength and resilience. BVSD recognizes the histories of the land in Colorado and the survival of the many nations that carry their oral traditions into the present. It is BVSD's responsibility to educate ourselves, our communities, and our students so that we can embrace the wisdom and knowledge of Indigenous peoples and actively stand together to address injustices. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and honor history, wisdom, oral traditions, and resilience of Indigenous people, and recognize the responsibility to care for and appreciate this land together.
Thanks, Lelania. I would like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you participate and observe our meetings. This time is our motion to approve today's agenda. Moved by Lelania, seconded by Kitty. Laura, can you please call me?
Chavez.
Yes.
Medler.
Yes.
Quinlan Oeda.
Yes.
Raj Paul.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Board members, today we have one item on our agenda. It's a work session information item, taking a deep dive and look at BVSD's All Together for All Students strategic plan. Dr. Anderson, would you like to do the introductions?
I would love that. Thank you, Board President Raj Paul, members of the board. Welcome. Good morning. Excited to today have our third deep dive into strategic plan UIP, joined today by our amazing data and academics team. Jonathan Dings, Claire Sims, Laura Cruz, and Chris Breck are going to be walking you all through not only our updated scorecards, you'll be able to see the finalized version of our dashboard and walk through that a little bit. That really aligns to strategic plan initiatives and our progress based on the conversations and feedback that the board has provided us at our previous meetings. We'll be able to, very exciting, go through some of the new assessments that will be part of the instructional infrastructure of our district moving forward. Walk you through some of the baseline data there. And then as always, lots of engagement, lots of questions. Again, I just am really proud of our district, of our board, in the ways that we really look at what's happening in our district based on what we're trying to do, and coming together as a team to make suggestions and improvements. I think that it is really a model for other districts who are looking to get better and work together and improve. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Dr. Dale Cruz.
Good morning, President Raj Paul, members of the board. We're glad to be with you again at this table and in conversation for a work session about, as Dr. Anderson said, the implementation of our All Together for All Students strategic plan, our UIP, and accompanying metrics. Last time we were at this table in December, the board had some excellent questions and suggestions, and we will have an opportunity to revisit some of that content and more today. We're going to be able to dive in together to look at some metrics and outcomes. Today we have a scorecard update to share based on your feedback in December. We'll walk you through the KPI dashboards that Claire has diligently been working on and developing. And you all received a link to those dashboards on Friday, and they've gone live now. And we're also going to share mid-year data from the assessments that we see. Oh, we don't have them. Oh, yes, the assessments that we see here, which do include some new assessments that we will provide more information about when we get to those. And of course, we're going to pause throughout for questions and conversation. Our discussion today centers, of course, our Altogether for All student strategic plan, from the KPI dashboards to our mid-year outcomes for students, looking at lagging and leading indicators all throughout the year. These are indicators of how we as a system are doing in reaching each of the strategic objectives, and also how we're reaching each and every student. So while we do have areas for improvement, certainly, we also do have promising data to share, and we're in a place of progress and possibility, and we look forward to talking about those today. First up, you provided, as I said, input on the scorecard, and Chris is going to walk you through some modifications based on that input.
Good morning, Board President Raj Paul, members of the board. When we met last time, we walked through an initial draft of this strategic plan UIP scorecard. Your feedback was that originally what we had set up here was icons, little circular icons that showed red, yellow, and green for the overall targets that we have for the UIP. You asked for a little additional detail. You asked that we break out some of those groups and show us where they are meeting the progress of those targets for each of those subgroups, as well as adding an additional key so that there was just a lot of clarity. So again, this is meant to accompany the KPI dashboard, the wonderful, amazing KPI dashboard we're about to walk through, give a snapshot to everyone on where we are with making progress towards those goals. So you'll see those changes reflected here, how we've broken out each of those groups of students. And then rather than a circular icon showing where it is, you'll see a red, yellow, and green for every one of those populations there. And then what hasn't changed as the lead indicators that are listed there, that'll be for every one of those UIP strategic plan targets as well. This is just a snapshot of one of those. Following this meeting, we'll take the scorecard, we'll hand that over to our communications team, make sure it's branded appropriately and ready for public display. But wanted to make sure that you had a chance to see the updates reflected from your feedback.
I have a question on this one. I think visually it looks great. How do we know where like all learners are? When we look at other points of data, it breaks it down by all learners, and then in the subgroups, depending on the subgroups we're looking at. Where is that? Would that be reflected here?
So I think the intent with this is, like I said, to be something you would have in conjunction with the larger dashboard. We also still have that link that's in there to the baseline data that you'll see. So this is just to reflect progress towards those very specific goals that we have set. But obviously, everything that you would have in a deeper dive from the dashboard will set that as well.
That makes sense. Just not seeing them side by side.
And it may be too that on this particular metric, because it's the proportionality one, the proportionality of all, it doesn't fit in this particular.
But I guess to that point though, it does seem like it would be helpful to know, well, I guess, I can't articulate this, but it does seem like it is good to know. I can't articulate it. I'm thinking that. There's something about the all there that does seem useful, but I can't figure out my finger.
Yeah, it would have to be all green for
All the time.
Or
by definition.
if you're disproportionate in one area, you're disproportionate.
I guess it would be useful. It would be good to have included in the text what percentage of all kids are qualified for special education. Just one sentence that says that.
Okay. We can do that.
So that would mean if you're disproportionate, but we're dealing with 1% of students and it's 1.5% of students, that looks like it's 0.5 off. Just let people know where it's going. That's what I was trying to think.
With the ratios next to the titles, next to the, like under progress winter 2025, the ratios of number of, like maybe some more detail there to kind of talk about the scope and scale of how many kids make you disproportionate versus proportionate?
Yeah, like I guess, what I was thinking would be, 12.4% of our students are identified for special ed. And that adds perspective to this. And so that lets you know what small percentages of small students are in terms of numbers.
I think those are easy changes that we can make any sense.
We can certainly add that to the scorecard.
And I'd also say, board members, as you get a chance to digest this and we see these in action and we get questions from the public, that we reserve the right to always make things better, right? And so we can always adjust as needed.
Yeah, I appreciate the other perspective of like what proportion of overall students are in our special education, right? And that's different than, we'd like it to be proportional. So for example, Hispanics will make 28.3, but right now they're at 35.5 or whatever that number might be, right? It's the difference. That's what you were talking about.
Right. I think our team we can take the feedback and make some adjustments. Again, all of these questions can be better answered probably through the dashboards when Claire goes through, but we'll see. And if not, then we can add the specificity in these scorecards.
Can I, when we're looking at the dashboards, like where does the scorecard pop up? Like how does it display?
It's not there yet because we wanted to integrate the feedback from the board from December, bring you back what an updated version would look like, get your feedback on that. But a next step for us would be to launch it. We haven't talked yet about where it'll live, but it does make sense to obviously we want it in a public place. So I don't know if it's on our strategic plan landing page and our KPI dashboards or where that will live.
Because I think that piece will help understand what additional detail, like if it's somewhere it's accessible with some of these other components, maybe you don't need as much detail in there. So part of it is like, where is it going to live once it's live and ready? And that might clear up some questions as well.
And keeping in mind that in the actual scorecard, there are links to the baseline data, which will, and then the progress data will change as we get that data. Those data.
Yeah, I'm in favor of keeping it, because it is like just a scorecard, right? To keep it basic and real simple, and then you can go to the further. So I just wanted some clarification before, but in terms of lead indicators, that seems separate from the other stuff. And so how do we interpret those lead indicators on the scorecard now?
So right now, these lead indicators are part of the 2-year UIP. So we anticipate having all of those boxes checked. Our target is to have all those boxes checked by the end of next year. And then hopefully those lead indicators reflecting in the grains across all of those different metrics of the scorecard, right? So as we check off different aspects of those, we can get inputs for context on that as well.
Okay, so they wouldn't be checked off until the 2-year point.
Right, they may be as we work through different things. So depending on which section of the scorecard you're looking at, some of them is hours of professional learning, other pieces are implementation around data-driven instruction that we do anticipate taking longer. These 3 lead indicators, we don't anticipate hitting until next year.
Is there a way to, I know in the past, Jonathan has used in progress or, somewhere, something to show. Otherwise it's just like nothing.
So as opposed to like check boxes, more of a progress indicator?
Yeah, something like that, maybe.
What do you think about that, Jonathan?
I don't know if it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, we were, in the past, we were using like a pie, and we would have the pie be full or quarter full or something along those lines, but we can certainly think about how that goes here.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, like, you don't want people to think you're not making any progress, right?
Until the 2-year point.
Because we've got a lot going on here, right? Like, we've got 1-year targets, we've got our 2-year targets, we've got our 5-year goals. We've got, this is a pretty in-depth scorecard with short cycle and long-term strategic plan initiative progress. Does it get too busy if we change those check boxes to more of a kind of a percent progress, like a progress indicator?
What about a thermometer type thing?
Or a thermometer or a pie chart? I think we could do,
Or we can use the same key that we have for the student group, since we already have an indicator at the bottom of what those mean. And one of them is some progress being made. Because these are very much living activities, these leading indicators, and we constantly have central office personnel and directors and leaders in schools having conversations, co-evaluating, for instance, progress on DDI. It may be hard to get percent indicators, but we could certainly get progress indicators.
No, I think that, and again, only updated quarterly, not like real lifetime, like live, like, I don't think that that's reasonable, but I do think, so we have a couple options on the table. We could do in those little boxes, red, yellow, green. Or we could do, they're most probably all gonna be yellow. That seems like the simplest kind of, without creating a whole nother different thing. The simplest way to move forward. How do folks feel about that? Well, we try there and we'll see if that works. And if it doesn't work, again, we reserve the right to constantly improve and make it better. So.
And I actually think having the red, yellow, green, because you already have the definitions below, you're not having to have a secondary definition. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, we've met the target, that's been accomplished, it's in progress. So I think that makes sense to keep it cleaner.
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking forward to launching this. I don't remember if we were at DAC or DPC meeting recently, and Jonathan was sharing UIP updates, and one of the parent participants said, all of this data is great, but can you just give us something simple? And we were like, it's coming. So this will be that product that meets that need.
In the spirit of simpling, that's for good boarding there. On the language, I recognize this comes from like the actual targets and everything, but the repetition of non-charter schools is kind of like, I wish there was a positive word for saying BVSD run schools, because this sort of like emphasizes that the charter schools aren't covered by this or included in it, which is not a big deal. So I would say BVSD operated schools, and maybe footnote it and say, oh, this doesn't include charter somewhere, so it's not repeating over and over again non-charter.
That's good. That's good. Good notice. Yeah, we do that. That's cool.
All right.
Whatever word you want to use.
Yeah, no, I think your words are perfect. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
For that feedback. So we have been vision casting the KPI dashboards along with you, and at long last, as I said, they're ready. Claire's going to guide us through those, and we'll pause throughout for engagement.
Thank you. Get the live dashboard up here. Okay, there we go. So my plan for this morning, as Laura said, we'll be pausing for questions. Please, interrupt me at any time. I know, so really value the feedback that you provided throughout the fall. And we've been iterating and really working to make this better. So since this is a good amount of content that we've seen before, what I will do is just make a point to emphasize what's different or what's a response to feedback as I kind of review and give the guided tour here. So here is the new public-facing KPI dashboard for the strategic plan. Just revisiting the overall purpose. So these KPIs are aligned to the core objectives of the plan. These are really focused in on our summative end-of-year results and data points. So that's kind of the cadence that we can expect results here. And tell us about our progress on the plan. We've really tried to make them comprehensive and streamlined, but as we dive in, you'll see there's also a lot of detail and nuance that we can dive into. So as this lives online, a couple features to point out. So this is translated available in both English and Spanish. So there are toggles on every part of the dashboard where you can toggle between languages. The other part, just to point out on the landing page, are some relevant links at the bottom, including some CDE resources around performance frameworks and unified improvement plans, where you can find all that information.
Our website is notoriously hard to navigate, and I'm on it and I put in the search menu dashboard and nothing came up. How do you get to it from the homepage?
We have not actually stood it up as a page on the BBSD website yet, so I think
Okay.
that's also.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you, by live, I thought you meant you could get to it through.
Yeah, not quite yet, so it will probably go on the strategic plan website, but, yeah, we haven't quite,
Okay.
things need to close that loop yet, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into the first page of the dashboard here. So this is, again, similar to, as you've seen before, the first page with the key performance indicators. We have really tried to put a lot of information into one snapshot view. So looking at the 4 objectives of the plan and metrics embedded within each of those. So let me actually zoom in and I'll go through each one by one. Okay, so starting with grade level standards and instruction. So again, just a couple things to point out. So that language option is always there. For each of the objective, there's an information button. And so you can click on that to get a few more details about that particular area. So for that objective, what is the key metric or metrics? Questions that you can answer with these metrics. So in this case, for example, how well did students demonstrate their learning of grade level standards? And then just clarifying the data source. Again, this is going to be our end of year metrics, most recent available.
Claire, I really like that you explicitly stated what questions can you answer with the metrics. I know the last time we looked at this, we were struggling about, what does this tell us and what does the data not tell us? And interestingly, I didn't notice that right away when I was playing with the dashboard until I looked at it on my mobile phone. And then on the phone, you don't have to even click on the little information key, the icon. It pops up instantly, and that's kind of actually what drew my attention to it. But I think that is really helpful if people look at that, click on the little eye to say, what can we potentially answer with this metric? I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because we're really thinking about, what does this tell us? What should I take from this? So with that, we kind of posed the question there. Another feature I built in is when you hover on the information, there's always going to be a sentence that helps you actually answer that puts that result into words. So for example, across all students in the district, 71% with the ends there met or exceeded expectations in reading and writing in the 23-24 school year. So that's always written out as a phrase of what is the takeaway point of this number that's being shown here. Okay, so honestly, the grade level standards and instruction, these are the same results we've now been looking at for several months, so not much else is updated there, but I'll just pause. Are there any other questions about that first objective and the metrics there? So then under tiered supports, so our key metric there is growth, specifically that median growth percentile, and I know that even myself looking at this metric all the time, it is helpful to revisit what exactly is that telling us, because it has a lot of kind of nuance built into it. So I tried to concisely put the definition of that median growth percentile. The key things to keep in mind, again, these are looking at students who did test in 2 consecutive years and their year-over-year progress relative to academic peers statewide or other students who perform similarly. This metric is also median, so we're looking at that middle score to know how did groups of students perform relative to their statewide peers, and knowing that a typical value would be 50 helps sort of set a benchmark to look at. So again, our question that we can answer, how do groups of students progress from year to year towards state standards? So within this, again, we've got our focus groups of students, and here's a piece that we also did talk about previously that I wanted to just surface again, looking at students with a documented intervention within this content area. So for example, in the reading and writing growth results, what did those look like for students who received a reading intervention? So that's embedded here, but another feature is when we look at any of our groups of students here and hover on the data, there is embedded with that a breakdown of that group of those who received an intervention compared to those who did not. And that goes group by group. So again, just another level to drill down here and think about that focus on tiered supports.
That's next level.
Yeah.
I mean, that is as precise as, I mean, that's actually, just share commentary, but, you know, the idea that we're getting to the level of precision where we know who we're helping and to the extent it's working or not working, just tells a very complete story.
Quick question. Are the reading growth percentiles of their subgroup or relative to all students? So when the Hispanic Latino students are at 48 percentile, is that of the 48th percentile of Hispanic Latino students or the 48th percentile of all students?
It's all students. It does have that academic peer component, but no, it's not just within a subgroup.
It's not a subgroup of the demographic.
Right.
Okay.
Great. So moving down to post-secondary preparedness. So here the focus is on our Grad Plus metrics. So our 4 areas of Grad Plus, students receiving college credit in high school, industry certification, the seal of biliteracy, and work-based learning experiences. So with this, we can look at both how much students are engaging with those Grad Plus opportunities, both within each opportunity and overall, and the rates of achieving within those. The update here is that this is now looking at our official class of 2024 finalist cohort. Okay, and so again, hovering, we can have an answer to some of those questions. So for example, overall, 86% of our graduates achieved in one of the 4 areas of Grad Plus overall, at least one area, in the class of 2024. All right, so our last objective area here, student well-being and cultural competency. There's a little more to unpack here. So we have multiple metrics, including the climate survey, suspension rates, and use of restorative practices. So we can answer a few questions with this. So one is just how favorable students are feeling about their experiences at school. I'll dive into that a little bit more. And how do our rates of suspension and restorative practices compare overall across groups? You know, dive down the rabbit hole with that as well. So again, this is looking at year-end data from 2023 to 2024. So the new component here is for the climate survey, we have, in response to your feedback and suggestions, made this a composite measure. And so I'll hover to show the details here. So now instead of looking at one item, we're looking at a composite of 3. So my teachers care about me, I feel like I belong, and students at this school are often bullied. So a note here about, this always comes up when we're looking through the climate data, is that some of these items are phrased in a positive and some in a negative. So just for your interpretation, that overall composite percentage is a percentage favorable. So like the sentence at the top, 84.2% of those responses were favorable across the composite. And then within each item itself that's shown, we're looking at percent agree, strongly agree. So we thought that was more interpretable to look at it that way. So the composite gives us the favorable, and then we can actually dive into each of the items to get more detail.
So even though the students are bullied, it's trained to be positive, negative value. strongly agree is a bad thing as opposed to the first two.
Yes.
Code.
Reversing that's really helpful. I know at school levels, they really struggle with that question, those types of questions, because like, well, wait a minute, 80%? It's like, well, no, it's like, that's a tricky, so thank you for reversing, making it consistent amongst the three, that it's agree, strongly agree.
And that was just really, I think, strong feedback from the board the last time we talked about this, that it's not just one question, it's multiple measures on the survey, in addition to other tangible measures that we have around historical practices and discipline schools.
I like the index a lot.
Yeah, I do like that index, just to get the interpretation right. So the 84.2% means that they had at least agree on my teachers care about me, I feel like belonging, and disagree with students that score off the board. Across all three of them, right?
Across all three. Yeah, yep. Exactly, yeah, and that third one gets reversed for the composite. Okay.
It's also positive, like if 84.2% of people feel positively amongst those three indicators, that's also just a celebration.
So then the other two metrics here are a little more straightforward. So suspension rate, and again, a little bit of detail within that, but it's spelled out here. So for example, 1.3% of students had one or more out of school suspensions in the 23-24 school year. With restorative intervention, the detail here is that that's 45.9% of students who had a behavior incident. And that's kind of indicated, you can see the lower ends. We're not talking all students overall, but any who had a documented behavior incident, who then had one or more restorative interventions in response to one or more of those incidents.
Those sentences really help clarify. Thank you for adding those.
Yeah, so the hope is from this view, that gives a pretty comprehensive snapshot. So looking at what are those metrics across the 4 objectives, you can look at it just straight on and get a picture. You can start to hover and get a little bit more of the nuance. Just fitting a lot of information into one quick view of this kind of a snapshot. So from there, we have also built in a drill down feature. And so this can help to go deeper into the metrics, look more over time. I'll talk through each of these, and look at other groups of students as well. Because again, at the top level, we're looking at we're looking at all students and then 2 focus groups of students, but we know we have many groups of students in the district. So,
Claire, how did you do that drill down?
Oh, yeah.
That one out.
So it's the tab at the top. Yeah, so that's one way to navigate through the different parts of this. Yeah.
Drill down, there it is. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Just a scoop for me. Okay.
Good. Okay. Zoom in again. Okay, so what we have here along the top, we have 4 different filter options available in these drop downs. So the first one is selecting the objective. So now this is broken out by each objective area. So we'll just start grade level standards and instruction again. Selecting groups, like I mentioned, so this will default to show our focus groups at first, but we can also drill to other program groups, race, ethnicity, gender, grade levels, and grade level groups, so like elementary, middle, high. Something new here is you can look at the district overall, or you can look at any school in the district. So I'll list it out here. It's a great feature to have. And then, as usual, the language filter is there too. So the way this is built, the top part of the view is going to give that 1-year snapshot, so our most recent completed year of data. So this is just what we had already looked at. And then down below, we have a breakout of 3 years of data. So a 3-year trend line within each group. So, and then broken out depending on the metrics. So here, reading and writing and math over time. So a couple things I want to point out here. So again, based on feedback, one component that comes up as you start to drill down and look at different groups is that there's a lot of data on the screen. So for example, let me drill this down by grade level. That starts to pull out a lot of groupings of students. So one thing we did, this was a suggestion at one of our fall meetings, is trying to make the visualization type adaptive to when there are many groups on the screen. So here, for example, pie charts got kind of busy with this many groups. So we switched it to a bar chart, for example. But we can also further filter this down a little bit more. So I did add one more filter option where you can choose just selected groups you want to look at. So let's say I'm going to clear this and we just want to focus on middle school grade levels. We can do that to just get a little bit of a cleaner, simpler dashboard that focuses in on those groups that we want to look at any given time. So that's just a little extra filter available as you're going through the dashboard.
Have school leaders seen these data, because the link is live, have schools been able to see this or play with this data yet or not?
No, we really did just launch it.
Yeah, we wanted to have an opportunity to share with the board first, which necessitated making the link live. And so we haven't had a chance yet, pending feedback in this conversation, to dig into this with our leaders yet. But that is the next step.
Yeah, down the road, I'd just be curious to see what their feedback is on all of this data and the slices. They can really, it's fascinating when you really drill down and get very specific. So the utility, I'm curious in the years to come, how it's being used and how it's helping improve practice. And so that's kind of, I'm excited. Obviously, I'm sort of thinking the next thing. So I was just curious. Thanks.
I mean, a tool like this, in my experience, will just sharpen people's data literacy and the ability to use that to know and understand where their focus needs to be, right? If you were to think, your general UIP, if we did a survey of all the UIPs in Colorado, right? Like most of them stay like 50,000 foot view, right? And so then it's like boiling the ocean, right? You do a bunch of things, probably the right things. You never know if they work or not. You never know how to address the subgroups or not, right? Rinse, repeat. Oh, well, we'll get them again in 2 years, right? But with this, right, it just doesn't empower it empowers our public, it empowers our district accountability committees, it empowers our school leaders, it empowers district leadership, it empowers the board to a level of precision that then will allow us to have just better conversations around what's happening, what's not happening, allows us to course correct, allows us to reflect in ways that we need to. When you're very high achieving, if you can't get into levels into the detail, you just celebrate that you're high achieving and you turn the page, right? Well, that's not what we're trying to do. All together, all students, right? And so this dashboard, in my opinion, and I haven't gone through every district's website and seen what they've done, but I would gather this is amongst the top 1% of dashboards for data in the country of anything I've ever seen. It is it's glorious. It's glorious.
I agree that this is great. The level of detail and really kind of go in and out is awesome. Just points of interpretation. In some cases, be careful at the school level because the numbers get really small, right? So just kind of caveat. But and two, year to year, you're showing 3 years here. It's not the same kids each year, right? It's different cohorts of kids each year. I just want that to be clear so that people aren't making comparisons about changes.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's probably worth the footnote. about those, annual cohorts of different students. And thank you about, for the point about the small n. So we do follow the rule of a minimum group size of 16. So that's, for example, here that's the denominator for this metric. So, but you're right. I mean, and we tried to put the ends on there very clearly too, so that you could think through, like, even if the group is 17 students and meets that like criteria, that's still a pretty small sample.
I was just jumping ahead to the climate survey on this one. And out of school suspensions. And I think this is an incredible tool for school leaders to, easily access what their students are saying. I just went through and looked at different middle schools, and to see that belongingness, it was super interesting to just even look at the difference between different middle schools. And then having our school leaders at a particular middle school say what they're using. Is it No Place for Hate? Is that what's happening, that their bullying numbers are a third of the middle school next door? I think this is super incredible for looking at shining lights on the places where we have work, and then shining light on some school that is somehow figured it out. So I just did like a little 5-minute thing there, and it was super awesome. Thank you.
A few things come out, right? Like you eliminate blind spots when you have this level of transparency. It allows you to scale best practice and learn from outliers within the same system, within the same communities. I think it just will help accelerate our improvement efforts in just a lot of ways. But I do really appreciate the way that you're already looking at it, and I think this is it's super powerful.
So is this page that's displayed available to us?
Yes.
And where?
Where do we find it?
Yeah.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, the only thing I found was the link that was in news and notes, and that just gave me the reading.
You should have, so the navigation is, there's tabs pinned right above the content.
Got it, okay. There is quite a bit of information that doesn't jump out at you.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we could try things to highlight that more, or work with the
Or it
navigation.
doesn't jump out at you, does, I should say.
Okay.
Well, and those tabs were hard to see, like,
Yeah, yes.
you just having a color to them.
That's probably the problem.
Really neat.
I've been following one of the Spanish ones of these, and for the most part, they translate great. Some of them, they don't pop up initially, but it's really bad on the student well-being and cultural content to that, and it's all just hash marks.
Is there,
So I think there's some work to be done on that, on the Spanish part. I mean, you can, if you hover over it, it pops up, but you have to do a little extra work to actually get any of the information out.
It's good news.
I see what you're saying. Yes, I found that, so especially I'll show
Yeah, there's some
when there's
spots
so
early
many
on,
groups to look at.
but here in particular, it's tricky.
Yeah, okay, I'll keep working on that part. Yeah, that's why I put so many filter options, but you do have to like click through and do so much with that. So thank you. I'll see what I can do with that.
And I think the way that we've designed the filters is helpful. So the people that, if you just jumped into one of these detailed pages, it would be very overwhelming. So having the big picture and allowing people, while you have to find the tabs, to drill down the way that they want to drill down, it really does make it more digestible, I think, for the public who's not used to, or anybody who's not used to looking at this data, not overwhelmed with this big screen of all kinds of different indicators. So I like the ability to filter and get more granular if you want to, but if you don't want to, or you're not comfortable or not ready yet, you can zoom back out. You can still get a clear understanding of what's going on in the district.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would add, I definitely am excited to share this with our school leaders as well. I know I get to work with them quite a bit with their data already, so I know that, for example, when the state test results come out, we spend a lot of time really doing deep dives. And they're looking to the student level, but I think there is utility to step back and look at the big picture across multiple metrics at once, and kind of take that snapshot view as well. We help a lot.
Just create a level of consistency and understanding. You know, when you're trying to get super precise with strategies and initiatives and subgroups that are not getting what they need from our school district, academically, socially, emotionally, that people can, if people just start looking at data files and CSV files and Excel spreadsheets, right, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation. Both positive and negative. Like, you don't want folks working on things that are actually going pretty well, and you don't want them ignoring things where there's real issue and challenge. I think that we really should pause and just recognize that this isn't just about knowing what's happening. This is about driving improvement in a way that's it's going to be really special.
Can I ask a question on our climate piece and suspensions and restorative practices? Do we have a way, or should we have a way, or do we want to have a way, looking at how our LGBTQ plus students are responding in the climate survey? Am I missing it, or is there any way to, is the N size too small? Do we not want that? I know that when we talk about bullying, that comes up for me, that we're looking at tracking it here by race and ethnicity, gender, but we're not holding that group out.
Yeah, so it's information that we haven't gathered. We simply don't have it in a database.
Do we ask anything on the climate survey that could parse that out?
We have that piece. We linked to our demographics. So we link to the demographics of Infinite Campus, which means that the main source we have of knowledge about patterns of transfer of LGBTQ plus students is the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, the one that's given every other year.
Okay.
And the patterns in that are really very, very clear and very concerning.
And can we integrate that somewhere in Healthy Kids Colorado?
So we have really good we have good visualizations of that data. I think from the publicly available data. So it's not to say that they aren't our data, but having data that you can compare in context to other data statewide, I think on that is really super helpful. We've typically not tried to present those data on our own because there's some presentation of that on the Boulder County Health website. Right. There's a more detailed presentation on the one that's basically statewide. So we've tended to shy away from trying to make that data ours. And also too, right, the content of that, it's a very broad survey talking about many behaviors, most of which are occurring in the community outside of school. While some part of that is focused on what happens at school, it isn't much compared to the whole thing. So we've, I think, tried to let those data live with the agencies that are very much about them, and can be understood in that context.
Could we, well, I guess I just want to make sure that people could understand where to access that data if we don't want to include it. I hear what you're saying.
And this is an important data point.
Yeah,
Right,
it
that,
is.
that we really care about. You know, to the extent that we can think about where we could have some mindful links for folks to be able to access that data. Now, to the extent that you couldn't take that data and integrate it into our own visualizations, I wouldn't suggest that we do that. But and it's hard because you can't get precise, right? Like if you're at a school developing school improvement plans, you know what community-wide data would be. You'd never be able to, because these are very anonymous, with no identification towards what school, right? So you couldn't. It's always going to be 30,000 foot community level data that I think can inform those types of things. To the extent that you could ever use that as a school without just responding to a community-wide trend, I think would be the limitation. But we could have a discussion, I think, on the pros and cons of potentially having some kind of a link to other, because that's important.
Well, and the other thing that comes up for me is on a school climate survey, there's probably questions that you could ask that would parse that out. Not saying, am I identifying as LGBTQ+? It's saying, is this a subgroup that we see getting bullied?
Yeah, I hear you.
I just, for me, it's really a challenge of, it is something we care about, and I don't think we are touching it anyway here. And if you have a school that is addressing that issue super well, I'd like to understand that. And if there's a school where that's a serious problem, I would like the leadership to understand that too. And I'm no writer of surveys, believe me, but I would think that in a school climate survey, you could start getting a feel for that, about what, maybe it's digging deeper into bullying. What are people being bullied about?
It might be, like in response to your question, it might be if if I'm a principal, right, and I'm taking this information, or if I'm on a DAC and I see a troubling trend in bullying where I can look at myself, I can look at peer schools, I can see, gosh, there's more bullying here happening there. I would probably go like more of a focus group type of a route, as opposed to, there's data privacy around some of these things that I think could be very concerning for folks filling out surveys, right? I would worry about that piece. But if there's an issue at a school, let me think about what would be the best way to do that in ways that protect data privacy and give us actionable information.
And I'm not advocating saying, okay, I need to say that I've been bullied because I have a certain identification. I'm saying I think that students are very aware of what's happening around them and see how people are being bullied. And, is the bullying based on race and ethnicity? Is it being based on LGBTQ plus status? I just feel like we could dig in a little bit deeper on our climate survey so that we have a better understanding of that. And I don't know how often do we do school climate every
2 years?
2 years. It's opposite Healthy Kids Colorado, is that right?
So we do the climate survey every year.
Every year.
And at high schools, we've allowed schools to have half the kids take Healthy Kids and half take climate survey if they're a school that's chosen for Healthy Kids. It's in every high school every year.
Right. And so I just want to advocate for digging in a little deeper on the bullying.
There actually is a place where we do ask kids if they've been bullied based on sexual orientation. That's on the bullying survey that we've done every year for the last 3. Part of the bullying prevention education grant. So we do have some information about it.
Thank you.
Us, totally on the same page as Linnea in terms of trying to figure this out and allow people to dive in deeper when there's in particular, when we have disproportionate outcomes by those subgroups, so like LGBTQ, bullying or well-being, we know that data is disproportionate, and so it's helpful to have the drill down appear somewhere. Similarly, the program groups, and I'm not sure program groups is the right street language for free and reduced price lunch, gifted and talented and emerging bilinguals. I think we think of them programs. I think public might think of them as student groups. I'm not sure what program captures it, but in the same way that it's useful to have all students compared to the focus groups, it would be useful to have all students compared to the program groups. For the same reason, it just puts it in perspective.
Meaning not having to toggle back from just.
Yeah, so if you look at the focus groups on the KPI indicators, it'll be all students, FRL, and Hispanic. But if you go to, say, program groups,
Then
you lose the all students, and it's just comparing other targeted subgroups to each other, which isn't as meaningful as comparing them to the general, the other students who aren't in that subgroup.
Does everybody have a different, I mean, I think program groups is a term that we just kind of use to summarize. If there's another term that would better describe what this is without overcomplicating what we're trying to do. Here what that might be.
Service groups.
Service groups?
I mean, it's an odd phrase, but this is about the kind of services that students get.
When I hear service groups, I think of things like Rotary.
Yeah.
And so that I would think of the kind of groups in the schools that do service. I don't know if there is one good
Student
word.
groups. Continuing with student groups. We use student groups to identify other groupings of students.
We have a distinction here between focus and program, and focus seems pretty inside baseball to me, but it's referential to the plan, right? I don't have a solution. If it's small enough list, for the focus groups, you can say who they are and just say FRL and Hispanic Latino. And for the other ones, say GT, IEP, and just label it. Or use initials.
Well, that's good feedback. Let's kind of contemplate that. We won't stop the rollout of this for that, but that will be an iteration as we try to improve and think about it.
And the feedback remains super cool, nice job.
Yeah, well, I do think we want to avoid the danger of too much description, too many ways to describe things, because that gets overwhelming. Because they're not all that many here, because when I first looked at it, I went, what does that mean, focus groups? And I looked at it, okay, it means what I see here. And then program groups, I didn't know what that meant either, but when I clicked on it, I went, oh, okay, it means this.
Exactly.
We'll try out some options and see. Thank you.
Shall we go back to the presentation? Thank you, Claire. Thank you, board, for your engagement. We are launching into more data. Let's go to the next slide. We're not going to review all the metrics on these next two slides. These are reviews of graduation and dropout rates that we've already shared with the board and the community. But as graduation is a culminating success measure, we want to spotlight these for just a moment as we launch into the next data sets. Overall, we're really pleased to have the highest graduation rate in BVSD since the class of 2016. And while this compares favorably to the state, whose rate is around 84%, our main competition is ourselves. We're always striving to be better, be improving, and do better by every student group. So while we do have the increases you see here for graduation on the next slide, the decreases in dropout rates, we know we still have work to do, in particular with student groups. We've already set goals for these. Our executive team and leaders are already building plans for enhancing the outcomes for students. And of course, another measure that we carefully watch, because we know that students need to be in school and engaged to be learning and growing, is our discipline and restorative intervention data. So we can go to the next slide, and Jonathan will share that next.
Yeah, so what we've seen is a very encouraging decrease in the incidence of out-of-school suspensions. We can see in the bright green line that we're at a lower level for this time of year, based on the 102nd day of the year, instructionally pulled about a week after that to allow for some time for any lag to catch up in data being entered. We can see positive movement here, and hopefully one that we'll see as we extend into the end of the year also. On the next slide, we see that while out-of-school suspension isn't being used as much, we see that we're holding basically a comparable use of restorative interventions, right? So these are what are offered to kids after an incident, but this use is good also in that same time frame. And the next slide.
All right, so as we launch into beginning of year to mid-year comparisons, we're not taking for granted that, because the board members are holding so much information at any one given time, that you have all of the details about what these windows are and what these assessments are. So we're gonna just have a brief primer here, and then we'll review them as we get to these test segments within today's conversation as well. So when we talk about beginning of year to mid-year measurements, we are talking about windows, assessment windows. And so you can see here.
I'm sorry, could I just intervene?
Yes.
Before we move on to this new topic?
Oh,
back to
yes.
the Previous slides. I just want to note that that's pretty significant, right? That we're decreasing out-of-school suspensions.
Yes.
It really
And the
is.
transition to
Yep.
to the restorative interventions and how important that is. And just kind of, and I think that's something we need to highlight, right? That we made this transition, it's really kind of system-wide. There's kids that have been affected by this. And is it possible to get a sense of like, what we mean by restorative interventions and what that, just, not for the slides, just for us to know what does that transition look like, right? So they're not leaving school, but what are we doing in the classrooms and the schools that's restorative to kind of support students and integrate and develop relationships?
Yeah, thank you for
I
that
don't know if you have
question.
that or not.
And thanks for drawing us back to this. That was a quick transition we made.
Sorry.
Um,
A little slow.
We really, it's approached from a multi-dimensional lens. So we have a restorative practices coordinator who works with our school leaders, who is in schools, who provides consultation, but also embeds into schools for training and also to support restorative interventions. We also have a very robust restorative practices toolkit that's available to all of our educators and leaders. And Kelly, Taylor Russell, KTR, our restorative practice coordinator, provides training for our leaders and others in schools who are working with students closely and supporting students and engaging in these restorative practices. And some of those happen at our Vortex meetings, where not only school leaders, but can be deans, counselors, and others who are working with student behaviors are gaining that. That toolkit is so robust. It's links inside links inside links. And you could get lost, just like our KPI dashboards, you could get lost in the ways to either provide alternatives to suspension or restorative circles or restorative conversations, proactive restorative relationship building. It really is kind of a soup to nuts kit, if you will. And Kelly also provides that live side-by-side guidance and training, as I said, not only in Vortex, but also goes to schools to provide professional learning for either small groups or whole groups. So that's what I mean by a multifaceted approach. It's extremely comprehensive, and we've made incredible gains and progress in how we're approaching discipline. And also, in some ways, we've only just scratched the surface because there's a much deeper well to dig into, which is a great thing.
I'd love to highlight one thing, and if it's not too problematic, Claire, if you could go back to our dashboard.
That was gonna be my next question.
Because restorative practices and restorative interventions, if we think about, if you could sort it by student group, elementary, middle, high, and the question around percentage of students being, so we're focusing where you would expect us to focus, right? Which is elementary school, then middle, then high school, in regards to how are the restorative practices or interventions being distributed. Heavy focus on younger kids as they're learning right from wrong, learning mistakes. The investment early, and I don't know that this is something that we ever set out to do intentionally, but I'm glad the data is breaking this way, which would say, right, the younger you are, the more likely we're going to spend the time on talking about what you did wrong. Well, how did it hurt others? How do you make that right? As we're building character, right, and building an environment where you see things like bullying and other, things that happen in schools across the country. The focus around elementary. The fact that, that you almost have like triple the number of elementary kids getting it than you do the high school students, feels like that this is being implemented with intention and not the district said I have to do restorative practices. So it just feels meaningful to me. I don't know. I just, one of the good things about having data and information is when you see it and you see something that makes sense, that I think that just makes a lot of sense out of this program.
Well, if I may too, I think it's really helpful to have the breakouts by school and grade and, all that stuff. And as a board member, you deal with the individual cases where someone's got a bad experience and they're following up. And as a member of the public, you deal with what's in the paper. And so in the course of the year, there will probably be 5 disciplinary cases that the Boulder camera covers. We're dealing with 1,000 instances of restorative justice being applied that we can reflect in stuff as thoughtful as what Dr. Anderson just talked about, or that we can track in the kids' sense of well-being in their schools, which we also have the data from. So at some point, it would be great to be able to communicate to the public the big picture. I realize that trying to figure out how the media and other people capture what's going on in individual cases is really hard to try to influence, and that we can't say much about the individual cases ever because of all the restrictions on us. But we don't have restrictions on us communicating the big picture and the stuff from the data, and hoping we could inform maybe a reporter someday to have a nuanced description of how hard this is, what our great people are trying to do, still bad things that kids do to each other. So anyway, I'm in favor of trying to leverage some of the information to deepen the community's understanding of how tricky this work is and how much we're committed to doing it. So I think this could all help in that regard.
I appreciate that, Alex, and it can be tricky. I mean, it certainly can be tricky because how often do people make judgments on something based on a singular incident versus the collective whole? And so I do think that that's something we need to continue to think about, not to take away from when folks have incidents that, maybe with their kids didn't get what they needed, regardless of who's at fault or what happened. I think that we always have to take those things seriously, and we do. And the overall, when you've got 29,000 students and you have, you have really, I think, promising data going in the right directions. How do you tell that as well to the person who is interested on what's happening? Sorry to take us backwards, to take us forwards.
One more comment on that. I think because Kelly is such an amazing resource, I'm going to cheer for Kelly, and I've known Kelly for a long time. It would be wonderful to have a story about our restorative justice practices, and Kelly would be wonderful forward facing on that. Not everybody is that, but Kelly would be, so maybe if we could get Amy Bounds interested in Kelly Russell Taylor, that would be awesome. Because Kelly does a superb job and she's really somebody that we could be highlighting. She'd be a great interviewee.
I think over the years, we've highlighted some of that. I know that a couple of years ago, when Janelle King was our restorative practices coordinator, she did a board presentation. I'm not sure if anybody picked anything up on that in the local media, but I do think that's a great idea.
It's no fun.
It's just very different. And if I'm being frank, I think that the use of restorative practices is being criticized nationally, right? In a lot of circles around like just kind of a waste of time, and it's just it's not like a, like we're showing statistical significance on a strategy and how it's working, as opposed to, the things that I'm seeing where folks try to do it, it becomes like you're letting kids off the hook. You got to give them the tough discipline for them to learn the lessons, because that's really served us so well over time. In any event, I'm proud of the work we're doing there. I'm proud of Kelly, and I'm proud of our schools, and I'm proud that we didn't just talk about doing it or try to implement something because it sounded like a good idea. We're using it as a strategy that's helping teach kids right from wrong, learn from their mistakes, all the things as parents we want, right? And as schools, we're supporting that work too.
Thank you, Board Member Chavez, for bringing us back to that conversation. All right, heading now to mid-year test score comparisons. As I said, we wanted just to start with a brief primer. So what you see here are the windows of the assessment windows. So beginning of year or fall is around mid-September, or is between the beginning of the school year to around mid-September, except for the caveat for kindergarten, which is a little bit later. And then mid-year data is collected during the window that closes typically in December or January, depending on the level. We're going to be reviewing the outcomes for the literacy and math assessments you see here, and we'll pause to talk more about those as we get to those segments. Starting with the math outcomes, and then we'll move to literacy. So we have a new assessment this year, the Measures of Academic Progress, or MAP, for our math testing at middle school. And as you can see here, the descriptor of MAP is that it's computerized, adaptive, multiple choice. It's taken by our middle schoolers, and progress can be compared across groups and across publisher norms. But also, it's a little more information about MAP. It's an NWEA product, so the Northwest Evaluation Association. It's definitely an upgrade from what we used before, which was the Into Math. It was the growth measure. Yeah. So MAP, or NWEA, is nationally recognized. It adjusts its difficulty. It's adaptive. It adjusts to the student responses, providing a more personalized experience. It evaluates student skills across various math areas, and it's often used to track growth over time and identifying needs for improvement. The MAP test provides really rich data output, which our teachers are bringing to the table for data-driven instruction conversations. And now Jonathan's going to share some of the outcomes of this baseline year.
So I have a quick question. Right now, we're looking at elementary school math adoption. And I think it's great that with our secondary math adoptions, we have the opportunity for some of this data to be looked at as part of that. For the elementary, is that something that you're asking to be considered in picking a product for the elementary school math? Because we haven't had consistent interim assessments that have been standard. And so I'm just curious, I'm excited to look at this data for our middle schoolers and for the next step with Alex, but is that something that's being, is it a priority in that curriculum approval for elementary?
It's a piece of what's being considered. We definitely want to have alignment between content that's being taught and learned and how we're assessing that, and what we we'll talk about more today, is that the alignment in several areas across middle school is showing greater outcomes. And so, that is all in progress. As you know, there are 4 products out for public review right now. And yes, the rubric for consideration includes having those quality assessment products.
Thank you.
And so just a reminder that this is a baseline year map. So kind of where we are with middle school math is that we began or initiated new curriculum materials last fall in the 23-24 school year. And to get to fuller, greater implementation really took us until about December, or let's say January of last year. And so we're just completing really our second full semester of consistent implementation of the new math materials with a baseline year in math testing. So that's just context for, yes.
In a little more context, we decided to move forward with adoption of new materials in middle school math because the results we were seeing in improvements in middle school math were lagging other places. And so we know that high quality curriculum, assessment, instruction all matters. And so I just want to make sure that this board knows, because we made this decision prior to you all being on the board, did we? This is prior to this board?
Some.
But that's why we fast forwarded that adoption and made that decision in the prior year's budget conversation as a result of weren't making adequate progress in math. So use that as the context as we look at our new baseline.
And then if I can add one more commentary, I really appreciate that intentionality. And I'd like to reinforce for people how much you're talking about your instructional infrastructure and how this fits together in a cohesive way that makes teachers' jobs easier and more effective and more satisfying in the long run, as well as helping students learn. So it's not like, oh, here's the revolving door of programs has changed again. It's like, no, this is developing a modern, effective infrastructure.
All right, Jonathan, you can jump into some outcomes.
All right, so what you're looking at here is a comparison of end-of-year targets on the gold bar with mid-year gain on the blue bar. These are gains on the grid scale score, which is what's used here, and we're leaning on the publisher's norm, which are really very good norms. This is a test that's been around for decades, right? So there's really very good data here, and the news is positive for this group of students, who are the ones who are taking 6th grade math, 7th grade math, 8th grade math, or some combination of those in an accelerated amount, like all of 6th and half of 7th in one year, right? So this isn't students who are taking algebra at middle level or geometry or that. Right? So what we're seeing is the gains that are on track to meet end of year targets or a little bit better. So this is really a very positive outcome here overall.
So to clarify, our most advanced students, right, by the time they hit 7th grade, are in algebra. Ish. Right, and 8th grade geometry. Like, so, like that's to say, to provide just a little more depth, is that, your percentage of highest forming kids who might, in other instances, really push these numbers up, right? They're in a whole separate category.
So they're not skewing this data.
Right. Which is, the VBSD kind of challenge, right? We have small groups of kids who score off the charts and they begin to, so this is more of your kids that are on grade level or slightly accelerated, not very accelerated.
Right, which is why the ends here can be helpful. If you have an idea of there's about 2,000 or so kids at a grade level, you can see that in 8th grade, it's like half the kids, right? So this would indicate half the kids in 8th grade are taking algebra or geometry instead of math that would be in 8th grade and would be
Sixth
getting
grade,
this
seventh grade, eighth grade.
test, right? Whereas in 7th and 6th grade, the numbers aren't quite as big.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So when it says 6th grade, does that mean everybody who is taking 6th grade math, regardless of whether they're in 4th grade?
It's a 6th grader
Okay, so
in this particular view.
so 6th graders who are taking 6th grade math,
6th
that,
graders who are taking any kind of math that's not just geometry or
oh, okay.
algebra. It's a little confusing.
And can you interpret what 4.1 and 8 mean in lay language for me on this?
8 is the number of points that the publisher expects 6th graders who began with this average score to make over the course of the whole year. And the 4.1 is the amount of gain that our 6th graders have made now. So it's a midpoint in the year, right? It's good that they're at about half, and we're actually testing on the early side. We ask people to finish this prior to winter break. So we are fully expecting to meet the 8-point target at the end of the year.
And is there a mid-year target that the math folks give us too? Or is 4 as half of 8 the right?
I would need to look into that. This is our first year working with this data in this way. And we've heavily leaned on the publishers, nice presentation that they have, and we'll work on getting that more fully replicated in our data.
So these points, they're just something that the publisher created. So it's not comparable to figures from other people taking other math tests?
Right.
But-
These are points on that basic scale, right? So you can have this test that's actually scaled across grades, right? And we can say there are 6 graders began about here, but we haven't tried to say, and that's comparable to a CMAS score of what have you.
But to put that in perspective, a little AI would tell you that 9 million students in America take the MAP every year. So their norms are really precise based on such huge sample size.
And then
So, yeah.
on the scale, on the y-axis there, is like the 10 the highest, like if you really crushed it, 10 is the highest you could get, whereas 10 just an arbitrary on the axis?
It's an arbitrarily picked number.
Okay.
I could have picked a little higher.
Thank you for clarifying. And it is great to have the national norms, because that does really give us a sense of how our students are doing and then, where the expectations are. So this will be, as I mentioned on Friday, this is going to be different for the board and the community to look at this information because it is so different from other types of data that we've looked at or that we're used to looking at. But I'm really excited that we have some interim assessment data to start really unpacking, and this is promising.
I do think this issue of like how many students are accelerated beyond its measurement is a fair question, footnote somewhere when we talk to folks. So,
Can you tell me, I know a lot of thinking of how we accelerate math students in elementary. Would this include, so it's the students that are taking, let's say, 6th grade math online from Boulder Universal, or the online, or if a kid takes BVSD online over the summer because they want to skip 7th grade and go straight to 8th grade, are they using the same content, and then would they also be taking the MAP tests?
So we haven't taken MAP over summer, but a student would likely be taking MAP at either the beginning or the end of their next course, right? But I think you also had a question in there about what the content of the acceleration was also, or you have more about the test?
Yeah, so like those kids that maybe are in like 5th grade and taking 6th grade math, then they would also, even though it's delivered typically in an online format through Boulder Universal, they would still be using this curriculum
Right,
and taking the
and
math test.
we also
and
have
the
that data, I just didn't put it on this slide.
Yeah, no, that's okay, and I'm just curious a little bit too about, a little bit on Alex's question and our students that are trying to accelerate at different points, like how the comparative there, how successful that is in long-term math success was just something that I was wondering about. A, are they included in the data, and B, I'd be curious to know, you know, if you're taking a whole year over the summer, how is that impacting your overall understanding?
And from a governance perspective, if we have a bunch of kids who are accelerating outside of our measurement that we share with people, we're understating how successful we're being for those kids, you know, ultimately.
So you're talking about the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Fifth graders, fourth graders who are taking sixth grade and seventh grade.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So that is included.
But a fourth grader taking the sixth grade is not, I thought, you said it was the sixth graders? in this one?
So the way that this particular view is organized, it's by sixth graders, seventh graders, eighth graders.
So we don't have a
And I
public view yet.
didn't happen to include kids in grade 5. There are 140 of them. They made gain that was it's 7.4 points, which I believe is very good gain, as you might expect for kids who are being accelerated.
Yeah, and pros, like to the point of not including our kids who are taking geometry within the, you know, seventh grade cohort, eighth grade cohort. You don't want to hide, right? Make the data look better because those higher achieving elementary school students are included in this data, but it would be just of interest having that view broken out to say, and the kids that are taking sixth grade math, here's how they're doing.
But if it's 40 out of 1,600, we're dealing with like, you know, 140, okay, sorry, yeah, 10%, not 2%. Yeah.
They aren't on this slide.
But this is fast. This is, you know, this is fascinating to me because I do think that we've gotten a good amount of pushback right throughout the community that, you know, the equitable model that we've pushed out because some of it's online and there's not as much direct instruction is resulting in kids not getting what they need. You know, I'm very interested in maybe digging into some of this data. We'll have a follow-up and find a way to get that to the board around, you know, is there, you know, what's happening, or does it give us the information for a kid who is being accelerated, whether or not they need to jump off the ramp and, you know, re-level. Does that make sense? Yeah. It is interesting. Very good. I love the questions.
All right. On the next slide, I've not added gold bars showing what the target is, but the comparison that's being made here is really across groups. And what we're seeing is relatively similar gains across most of our largest groups here in this particular slide by race and ethnicity. On the next slide, what we see is that there are comparatively good gains for multilingual learners and gifted and talented identified students.
And on these two slides, it's the average of 6th, 7th, and 8th that you're displaying.
On these, I've included everybody, so I've not been as
So the
consistent.
The
I've
goal,
got this one will have the 5th graders mixed in there and the 9th graders, so
but if it were to have a gold line, it would be an average of 8 and 6.8 and 5.4, is that correct?
So the targets that kids are given are based on their individual Paul score. So you're right, it would, in concept, it would be an average of the 8 and the 6 and 4 or 5 were
I
requested.
think it's hard
But-
to read without understanding where
Yeah.
they,
Yeah, and
yeah.
so,
I think I understand.
I think I'm hearing you will like the gold bars and you'd like to see
I
more.
think the
more.
gold bars help me to understand it better.
Good feedback.
I am absolutely sensitive to small N issues, but I'm struck by the importance that we place on our land acknowledgement before every meeting. And then when we break out our demographic groups that we're not including our Native American population. And so as long as we're going to deal with our legacy, which I'm totally in support of, I would love to see us continue in keeping it front of mind when we actually have discussions about outcomes and experience for students. So, and I know the numbers are small, and so we might interact with small N issues, but I would just encourage us to think through when we can.
It's an N of 10 in this case, so I can't
I understand.
publish that.
So then they're just not included at all when it breaks down?
They're not included on this slide.
Right.
As
Right.
for other groups that are also, that one other group has, and that's much too low also.
But that doesn't mean a school or the district isn't looking at that data. It's just not data that we're sharing publicly because the N size is so small. When you're trying to make change and you're looking at the data and doing DDI, you're still, those people see the data, so they are like, paying
Right,
attention.
the focus, I think, as you put, is we're right there on the individual student,
Yeah.
as opposed to me trying to draw some inference from the average of 10 scores.
Yes.
The focus really should be.
Okay, thank you.
Could that be a footnote somewhere, just that due to small numbers, we're not reporting this out for Native Americans?
I think it makes sense that there to, if we're gonna mention that, to mention it at the beginning,
Yeah,
to define what our ends are and note that we have other groups that will not show up on this.
Well, we have that whole slide that we talked about where all the tests are. Just another bullet saying, subgroups, group N size less than 16 will be published.
For anybody
I just
that goes
I
back.
just don't want to actually lose the discussion farther down. What we talk about at the board or the leadership matters, what two schools talk about. And if we're not able to talk about groups because of small N, even though we value it greatly, we may end up not be contributing to the urgency to have those discussions at the school level. So, and if the school level people are using the tools that we develop as a district, because those dashboards are great and communicative, but they've dropped out populations of students because of other considerations, then we're sort of undermining ourselves. That's my concern.
That completely makes sense. And one of many values of data-driven instruction is that teachers are looking student by student at who's mastering concepts and standards and shaping instruction interventions based on that. And I also want to just mention that factoring into these data, speaking of interventions, is the fact that we now have a consistent math intervention across most of our middle schools. And that's also an HMH product. The most is because we provided it to all middle schools last year, and we looked at things like usage and readiness and cost. And so we really were very intentional with where that product is right now. And we're working closely with our HMH partners to track progress of those small student groups as well. But that data is also factoring into the progress that we see here. We anticipate that at middle school, as teachers become even more fluent in their new math materials and this new assessment, we're going to see improving outcomes. Let's move to high school and Alex. So Alex, or the Assessment and Learning in Knowledge Spaces assessment, Alex is a new math assessment consistent now across high school math of algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. It is also computerized, it's also adaptive. It provides scores that indicate the percent of content mastered or a content area mastered, and progress can be compared across groups as well. A little more detail about Alex, another baseline year and another high quality assessment. It assesses the content knowledge that has been presented from a course to students in, as I said, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. In addition to that assessment, it also comes with personalized practice for students. And that's digital math practice. And the results that we'll be talking about show an increase in that percentage of mastery in a content area. And like MAP, Alex is providing rich data outcomes and output that teachers are understanding. They're able to navigate the data outcomes dashboard, and they're using it for data-driven instruction at our high schools as well.
Before we move on, I have a question a little bit about fidelity. With Alex and MAP, and when we get to the Common Lit, do we have a sense of the fidelity in having these assessments at the beginning of the year and at the middle of the year? Do you know, based on the data that gets input, that you're able to see where it may be happening with less fidelity, the taking of the mid-year assessment?
And Jonathan, we have percent of students at each, overall and at each site who take the assessment.
So I want to make sure I'm hearing the question. Are you asking about the fidelity of implementation of the materials, or the alignment of the test to the?
Well, the test should be aligned to the curriculum because it's coming from the publisher. My question is, the fidelity, it's a fidelity of utilizing the curriculum, but mostly is everybody actually taking the test in the window that you're asking them to take it, the mid-year test? And if they're not, do you know that there are gaps in any certain places that might be impacting the data in any given?
We nag pretty hard for cases where testing might not have been happening on a particular schedule, and I haven't presented any of the data here on what that would look like, but the ends that we have to begin to tell that kind of story. But I don't have an answer for you about exactly how it works. I will say that using this Alex tool for this first year, which is not just at high school, but middles also, if they're taking algebra or geometry, right? It's a pretty new practice for our high school teachers, and asking them to integrate time with an AI tutor into class time with that rate. I think there's a lot of new about this, including its new data for us, its new use of extracts, its new wondering about how this goes. I mean, this will be baseline data. I expect to clean these up a little bit and have things change a little bit, but I wanted to at least show you that we have them. We have patterns we're using, and we're asking people.
I'd say a couple of things. This is a really important question, right? To the extent that we've had a high quality assessment aligned to curriculum, see in the past efforts, this is why we've struggled with getting this data for math, is that these were assessments that were developed that weren't necessarily aligned to the curriculum, but were aligned to standards. And to the extent that there was a disconnect between instruction materials and standards being taught and standards being assessed, I would say that that's been a challenge for us in math, which is one of the reasons you have to get the right materials, you have to get the right assessments, because it's coming from the publisher and not something that's built like this. You know, when I first started in 2018, 2019, we had a big effort on common assessments in mathematics. We would develop them, and then we would give it to a team of teachers, and we would try to give it at the end of the year, and a very low fidelity of giving that assessment. We found that some teachers were giving the kids the assessment limit, but like the way that it was being implemented wasn't, and these are just bad systems instructions. This was some issues with our people. It was issues with the system as a whole. And so by resetting, revamping Alex and MAP, these are assessments that have been they've been around as long as I can remember. These are good assessments. They give good data. They give you a sense of norming beyond the scope of our district and classroom that I think is incredibly helpful to allow us to know what's happening. But there is a level of accountability to giving, like, do schools have to give the assessments? The answer is yes. Right now, first year, the answer hasn't always been yes, you have to. Sometimes it's been if you want to, or when you want to, or if time permits. And I think that to get to the place that we want to with data-driven instruction, you have to have valid, reliable data to have the conversations. And so as we've changed the instructional infrastructure and as we've led our schools through the curriculum adoption process, and the building out an assessment system that gives us the information to allow for tier 2 reteaching and intervention, what you're seeing is now we have a consistent math intervention. Right now we're having consistent data-driven instruction conversations, elementary, middle, high school. Like these things are continuing to grow and evolve. But Nicole, your question, I think, is one of the big things that showed up as not only we started our strategic plan, but reviewed our strategic plan. Like you have to have these things to have the right conversations to drive instruction that meets the needs of kids. Hard stuff. And so I think that there's other assessments people could use besides map or ALT, but as long as it's aligned to your curriculum as being implemented. But I will share with you that there is a level of accountability, right? If we have a school where only 30% of the kids are taking it, that's not going to stop. We're going to follow up, right? We're going to follow up and we're going to make sure, and hopefully at some point come to a standard which you have for statewide testing, right? The standard, the national standard today is 95%. Right? Now, it gets complicated in Colorado because you can opt out and do some opt-out things. So maybe we're not at 95% because opt-outs count as participants, even though they don't take the test. It's kind of weird, but that's how it is. All that to say, it's the right question. For somebody who's been here and involved in this for a long time, it is the question. And I'm confident that the longer we go, the more we do, the higher the usage will be, and the better our teachers and schools and leaders will be prepared to look at that data, analyze whether kids are above or below where they need to be, and make the adjustments structural.
And if I can piggyback on that, I have one statement and then two follow-up questions to illustrate it. I guess for me, we have our state assessment on CMAS and PSAT and SAT, and they come out, and it takes a long time to get the data. And what do you know? You can't use it with that student right away. And the sole goal is with the interim assessment is to have stuff teachers are using with data-driven instruction in the PSS right away. And so it's great that we're moving in the direction of still nationally normed, large and comparable data sets that match the curriculum and what we want. And the criticism we get from the CMAS is, the teachers don't have it in time to use it. It's like, well, that's not what it's for. So how quickly do the teachers have this data in hand? Like when does it come back to them? And how long does it take for a kid to take one of these tests? Are my two questions.
So these are the data that are available immediately. And as far as testing time on Alex should be around a class period.
These are adaptive, so like they're getting right to what the kids know and don't know.
Adaptive, right. And in the case of this test, Alex also, I mean, it's got this knowledge space idea of, testing all the, trying to have algebra, for example, thought of as every specific piece of content in algebra. And if a kid knows these, and these, the next logical thing to learn is over here, not over here. So this is a very sophisticated system that makes for very particular recommendations that way, and some of which the teacher wouldn't necessarily have to use, right? If you have time where the kid is using Alex, it's built as a AI-based tutor. So, yeah.
And really helpful ways to reduce the burden on a teacher of diagnosing what's going on, making up their own assessments, trying to explore it without adding a testing burden and greatly increasing the teacher's efficacy and ability to do their job.
One thing, I happen to have students who take, a student that takes Alex, or should be taking it, and then commonly, similarly, it led down to this conversation about the Alex test. I was trying to pull some information on this, and my my daughter had a lot of questions about, similar to us, like trying to understand what all this data means. The Alex has a funny score that the students see, and that the students actually don't know how to make sense of it. And so if the parents can see that data, it's just not for the board, but as these new things come out, how are we helping students understand what it means, and how are we helping parents understand what it means when they get these assessments? So I just wanted to share that feedback on Alex's. All of it is a learning process, I think, because this is a brand new year, but the information and how it's graded is a puzzle to some folks.
Even a puzzle to me as I look at the next slide.
So, sorry for that aside.
It's all meaningful and not an aside. We know that MAP testing had a greater fidelity than ALEX testing, but that enough students did utilize the ALEX testing that there's no statistical concern in terms of the data that we're going to share. And to Dr. Anderson's earlier point, we just completed the first semester with new curriculum materials in high school, and this is the very first use of ALEX. And so, to your point as well, President Rajpal, we're in a learning year, and we anticipate implementation dips, just like we saw in that first year in middle school as well.
And this is really, really important. Like if we were to do a survey of all of the parents in BVSD of Nolan high schoolers, how many kids get additional help besides their teacher in mathematics? Right? Whether their parents help, or an older sibling, or younger sibling in some instances, or somebody that they're paying to help. This information is helpful for all of those groups to be able to make sure that kids are getting what they need. So I do think that it's a point well taken. I think that, a point for further conversation for our team is, as we are rolling out new assessments, how do we make these accessible for all parents so they know what it means and what they need to do? Right? Because part of the kids' education is not just empowering our teachers, it's empowering their kids themselves and their parents to know what they need to do to get to where they want to be.
On the next slide, what we've done here is try to look at knowledge mastery gain. So if you can think of all these points I was pointing to in the air about algebra, if a kid knows 100% of those, right, that would be complete knowledge of algebra. What we're looking at here is what were the gains made from the beginning of the year testing, which was end of August, early September, in mid-year testing, which could have been in December, or we allowed a wider window that went to January. And a pattern that we see, right, knowing that I'm showing you these as our first cut data, first time, they'll probably replace them, is we saw higher gains at grade 7 and grade 8. So these are advanced students taking algebra or geometry. Two here, we're seeing bigger gains in that case than we are for seeing kids who are taking these at the more traditional grade levels of 9th, 10th, and 11th, or grade 12, which would be taking it later than ordinary. So we see a sort of pattern here that follows a logic that we kind of expect, but we know this is a baseline, first time through, not the cleanest data.
No, finish your thought.
I was going to go to the next slide, so I can.
So these percentages, it's the percentage of material that's included in that course.
Yes.
So for seniors who are taking one of these 3 classes, halfway through the school year, they've learned only 5% of what they should know by the end of the school year?
They've only added 5% to what they knew at the beginning of the year, right? And I expect that figure to go up once I have data that are a bit cleaner, but I don't expect the pattern to change of grade 12 showing lower gains than grade 7 and 8.
So this doesn't reflect what they knew.
Right.
when they
This
started.
is the
Okay,
game.
got it. So, okay.
And I had to work hard to come up with a metric that I couldn't make fit into this presentation. Some tools don't lend themselves as well to presentations. This may be one.
Well, maybe Alex is here to be able to articulate my question, but to me, this is very, very difficult to understand because to me, it looks like underachievement at all levels, which I'm sure it's not showing that. I mean, I understand what you're saying. 7th and 8th graders who are advanced are know significantly more than their 12th grade counterpart who may have a challenge there. But I still don't think it helps me to understand our overall achievement versus a new one.
Is this meant to tell us that, answer that question?
Yeah, this is my first cut at what I could try to use to explain this knowledge space.
I don't think I'm gonna clarify your question any better,
Oh,
but
great.
I have my own related one. I mean, just for layperson's language, algebra is kind of a 9th grade expectation, geometry 10, algebra 2, 11, trig 12. And if you're advanced, you're in calculus 1 early, and if you're super advanced, you're in calculus 2. So a 7th grader taking algebra is 2 years ahead of grade level, and a 12th grader taking algebra 2 is 2 years behind grade level, right? So if, just in terms of like, there's this chart of like what you expect students to take by grade, we're looking at all these grades, which is going to include the accelerated younger kids and the behind older kids. So if the 12th graders are still taking algebra in the 12th grade, they have been behind on math for a long time, and their performance and gains are probably not on par with everybody else. So we've got sort of apples to oranges things going on for what is an at grade level expectation,
Yeah.
which is then like, we're losing the students who are so accelerated, not so accelerated, just the ones even in trigonometry aren't here, they come in the SAT. And then the 12th graders who are off in Calc 1 or 2 or something aren't showing up right either. So I guess is this sort of a validity question, I guess. It's like, are we measuring the wrong kids at the wrong time? We're making comparisons. And I'm not saying we're trying to do any inference from this. We're just describing, but I don't know if we're capturing that.
Yeah, this is tricky. I would say that over time, not now, over time, you might be able to correlate certain performance on ALEX to a level of predictability on CMAS or on passing courses over time. That's what you'd want. That would be, and then this gives you gives the teacher these are the things you need to do to get them where they need to be. So in an effort to be transparent, we've been kind of confusing. But honest about that, right? And I do think over time you could do some correlations, and I'm certain that HMH has done some correlations with ALEX and CMAS. But the trick is, in 9th grade and 10th grade, you don't take the CMAS. It's like a PSAT, SAT type of a thing. So there's no end of course exam for algebra, geometry, algebra 2 in the state of Colorado. And a lot of states that had those are moving away from those. Those made cleaner correlations. We could present other data that would be clearer, but maybe not as accurate, like grades, right? How many kids are passing? How many kids are failing? Failure rates. But then again, it's like, well, are they teaching the same thing? And when you have consistency through a curriculum and through assessments, that correlation gets stronger, but it'll never be precise. So all that to say is I do think that I appreciate that we're presenting and we're tracking the data. And I do think we have to think of a different, and I think that everybody on the team agrees, a different way to present this. Because the story that we're trying to tell is how many kids are on track to learn what they need to in algebra, geometry, and algebra 2.
And I think this is more helpful if I were a teacher, right? To understand, this, and this, and here's where I go. But I'm not sure from a public perspective, this just doesn't help me to understand how we're doing in teaching math in our district.
Right.
Which I do think we need to have that in front of our public.
And if you look at CMAS, we're doing incredibly well, right?
And then do we need to just you can present this and people can take what they will, but if I were to look at this, I'd be like, what? It's just confusing.
Yeah, I think the Lydia's point here, this seems what's useful from a DEI perspective for a teacher who's expecting gains, right? These are the gains for the grade level, and this is difficult to interpret without the sense of what the expected gains are from what goes on here. Right? So I think that's part of this.
And without knowing where they came in at. And this is
Right.
tricky because also my wondering is, well, by 12th grade, so this is a gain from the start of the year. Maybe by 12th grade, this is the second time they're taking algebra, and so it's not as new. In the 7th grader, maybe it's the first time they're seeing it. Is that why the gain looks different? Algebra 2 is notoriously harder than Algebra 1, and so like mixing it all together, I think it's just hard to, it's an interesting first attempt at looking at where kids are at the mid-year for our new curriculum, but there's lots of questions to unpack in both, the grouping of these three very, very different classes across those grade levels. And I think also because we came off of looking at the MAPS test, which compared it to national norms and expectations, and this one doesn't have that, it's just a little, but I think overall, I am grateful that we are finally at a place where we have a mid-year, a way to look at how students are doing in the middle of the year that is consistent and getting increasingly consistent as time progresses.
The takeaway for me is that we have some work to do, right? To figure out how do we communicate what this means in a way that allows schools, parents, everyone to judge their performance and make adjustments mid-year to get our kids where they need to be.
On the next slide, which I won't spend much time on given the conversation we did, the very helpful conversation we did. Thank you. We tend to see that gains are relatively comparable, and we also see some pattern, a little pattern in here that I would kind of expect if I had a math measure that didn't show high gains for students who are Asian compared to other groups that we have. That would be a very different pattern, for example, from many of the other ones that we've seen, and that would make math more practice. But we'll see if these hold up as we clean these data and, of course, think of new ways to show what they mean. And we also see comparatively good gains for GT identified students, also a pattern we've seen on other measures. So again, these sort of lend some credibility to the comparisons that are being made and help us understand the pattern.
Any further discussion about the map? Okay. All right, so the last data sets we're going to share with you are elementary and secondary literacy. Starting with elementary, you see the windows here that we talked about earlier. Just a reminder that our current literacy assessments are iStation for dual language elementary schools, which is adaptive in English and Spanish. iReady for our monolingual elementary schools, which is adaptive in English. And in terms of the literacy assessment, we're in contract negotiations now, and we anticipate information will be coming to the board in late February, and then onto a consent agenda in March. So let's take a look at data.
All right, so what you're looking at here is combined data on iStation and iReady. iReady is taking it at our monolingual schools. iStation is taking it at our dual language schools. And what we've done here is to look at the median achievement percentile for the group of students in 1 year who have scores in fall and at mid-year. Okay? And we've done this for 2 consecutive years, but we haven't matched students across those years, otherwise we'd be dropping out some fifth graders and replacing them with kindergartners. I mean, it'd be odd. But what we have are pretty comparable ends here. And we see that in each case, students who took a test in the fall window and in the winter window made a gain of a couple points relative to the publisher's norms, right? This is high achievement overall. And we followed the same rules in each year. If a student's primary language is in fact Spanish and they're taking iStation, it's the score that's given, the test given in Spanish, otherwise it's English, is what's taken there. So, that's what we see overall, and the note that this thing about fall window and that always is a little bit basically sticky with kindergartners. Some kindergartners are ready to be tested very early in their time, and they can fall into the fall window. Others might not be ready to be tested until after that window is closed. Questions about this slide before we build on it with the next slide? Okay. So what we see here is an improvement for Hispanic students. This is in terms of the terms of the median achievement. So the middle achieving student in that case went from 42nd percentile nationally to the 44th. And on the next slide, we see substantial improvements for multilingual learners and for students served in special education.
So on both of these slides, it looks like some groups actually got worse. So they lost one.
Yeah, right. There were little losses and little gains. Movements from 81 to 80 and 51.0 to 51.5. Yeah, there were.
To what do we attribute this?
I would be cautious about any 1 point change. That number is just too little to be that. The 1.5 point change for Asian students, I don't know that I would ask much about that. I think of some variation for a group that size. So I don't have a particular attribution that way. I do have a question on our free reduced lunch data in the next slide. You notice that N is a much bigger change, as I think we alluded to at the last meeting a couple months ago. Good for you, if you can remember any of that, was that we did have a different way in which some free reduced lunch data are being captured for kids who were on the rolls in the previous year. So we do, while that's the biggest negative change on the whole bunch of these, it's the one that I have the least confidence in showing that as, oh yeah, something changed. We do need to understand that one more. I'm sorry we didn't look at it harder. They advanced at this meeting, but it was something that once we were adding the ends at the end, it was like, oh.
And I'll say, like we talked about earlier, it's different groups of students, right? In 2020, you're getting a whole new group of kindergartners, and you're losing a different group of fifth graders. So the cohort is not the same. It's not matched data. So that could be part of it too. So the same
From fall, but from fall to winter, it's not.
So what this is, and I should have explained this better, this is winter to winter. So just complicate this a little bit more.
So it's two
I took a
different-
match group in
okay,
each year. I took a match group in each year, and then I looked at the one. So this is this
That
is
makes a
gross
lot more
and doing.
sense to me. I thought
Okay.
it was fall to mid-year,
Okay.
thinking, why are they all
Yeah,
losing?
right. And which is one I would be more concerned over changes in that case also, because you haven't got.
Right,
you
okay.
had-
This makes perfect sense now. Yeah. It was like the first year of, what was it, CSAP? And everybody wanted to go to Douglas afterwards because they scored the highest in fourth grade. But then the next year, a different school scored the highest.
I guess one of the things I'd be curious about, and I'm not sure about what level of reporting to do this for, whether it's a board or school level thing, but I would be curious to know about confidence intervals or, whisker and scatter plots where we get a sense of if we think an 80 is any different than an 81. And I know that like at the national level, these are such big tests that there's so many people that small number of changes are significant. But I don't know at 5,000 if a 1%, one score difference is really meaningfully different. So I guess it would be good to have some discussion of that somewhere. So that when we look at like the Blacker scores with ends of 69 and 84, do we think, this is not really different? And I don't know how to capture that. And it's always a tricky thing for the public versus governing people on boards or educators, but I would love some measure of that somewhere in the thing. So, hey, anything less than 1% with less than 2,000 people, you should treat as not really different.
Yeah, I think we've gone back and forth on this issue, right? To the extent that we want to be incredibly transparent, right? And to the extent there's this statistical meaningful difference, I think it's tricky. Are you asking that we somehow think about what a standard would be in terms of size, change, confidence interval? Like I just think that it's people's, I don't know. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not proposing a particular thing or to change it all, but I do think with all this discussion, when people are starting to use it to assess what they think is the value at schools adding and stuff, or where the population is being well served, having some voice of moderation of, hey, there's in small n leads to instability, some discussion of that somewhere is okay to capture for people so that they don't over-interpret it or don't over-celebrate it, whatever is going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the point about statistical versus meaningful, right? Is it just variation from numbers? Is it small sample size? For me, what's most striking is the big difference between Black and Hispanic students versus Asian and tourists and white students. Just being consistent.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Hispanic, with the multilingual learner rate being so much lower, there's going to be a big variation most likely there between those who are monolingual versus multilingual. And we know that in elementary school level, it takes a while for it to catch up, so you can't interpret it the same way. So that's why being careful to interpret multilingual people are very different.
Couple of additional notes about elementary literacy in terms of curricular materials. Last year we had 9 early adopters for the new Into Reading resources. This year all of our elementary schools are online with Into Reading. So it is an implementation year for our schools. They will have just completed 1 semester of Into Reading. We also recently took a peek at some mid-year data from the virtual intervention program, and the mid-year results are looking really promising. So that's also built into into these data that some of our students are engaged in the VIP program. In fact, it's now serving over 500 students across 29 schools, elementary, PK8, and middle school. And we now have a bilingual teacher, so our dual language schools are participating, and we have an English language development specialist who is one of our VIP teachers. And so some of our students are in year-long programming. We started with a 1 semester only programming VIP when we were just learning what could work. And now we have some students who are in the program for 1 semester and some who are in for a full year. So they're getting that slower pace to build those foundational reading skills. But I bring all that up to say that, of course, all of these factor into the data that we're seeing in the outcomes.
Laura, I have a question on that. In the dashboards, I noticed that, some of the slices you can look at around interventions for both math and literacy. And if you go and look at that for high school level, there's virtually none, right? Interventions at, like having true interventions at the high school level seems to not be a standard practice. And I was wondering if you ever see an opportunity for something like the VIP. For our students that have gotten to high school and are not performing at grade level, some of those interventions, is it something that is being considered being implemented beyond the earlier years and into those higher years?
That's a great question, thank you. And you've been on this journey with us long enough to know that we started by really shoring up elementary school, and then we moved our sights to middle school, and next we want to shore up middle school and then move our sights more to high school. But I will say that we do have really great reading as a secondary literacy intervention at some of our middle schools and some of our high schools, and then we have into Math 180, which is a math intervention at some of our high schools as well. We do want to put a stronger focus on fidelity in these. Again, first focusing on fidelity across middle school to get that very right as we're building the foundation. We did learn with VIP at middle school, it's been really tricky to work with like a block schedule and to get students to participate and to get enough students to participate. Having said that, we know of 5 additional middle schools who don't have really great reading that we'd like to be able to apply VIP to. So we're playing with what that will look like schedule-wise and what it could look like potentially in high school. Our scheduling could get trickier, but that's not to say we can't make it happen.
So that explains it, because then I started going school by school and looking at that intervention component, and some schools had a bit larger end sizes of students receiving intervention in reading and in math, and some it was really small. So it might, and then I had a lot of questions, so it might just be, so some schools provide those interventions and some schools do not. It's not, that's helpful for me to understand some of those data sizes.
And that's an area where we're working to create more consistency. And I believe that we are ready to move to secondary literacy. Same grounding in the windows. Common Lit is the assessment being used at secondary schools for all 6th through 8th grade students and some high school students, which you can see on the slide. Notable that as you look at the data for middle school, just keep in mind that this year, so we've been using the Common Lit assessment, but we had not been using its accompanying standards-based curricular resources called Common Lit 360, but this year we did require Common Lit 360 standards-based units at middle school. There are 6 of those. We required 4, and we're moving towards 6 because we want teachers to have a chance to get to know this and build it into their literacy and reading, their LA and reading classes. So they hadn't been consistently used until this year when they were required. And I believe that we are seeing some outcomes in the data that show that alignment is serving students well.
And then for Common Lit, it is assessing students' understanding of like text. Is it like you read something and then you respond to it? Or what is Common Lit assessing? Because I know writing is very different.
Reading.
It's reading, it's a reading assessment. Okay.
Aligned to standards.
Aligned to standards.
We can jump into the next slide.
All right. So this follows the same model as the earlier slide that you saw for iReady and iStation. And it's looking at median achievement percentile within each year for the group of kids who took the test both in winter and in fall. So within the fall window and within the mid-year window. And what we see is if you focus on the green bars, we see a little gain at middle level over time and some hint of gain at high school over time, with the mid-year result being a little higher in 24-25 than it was in 23-24 at middle and probably high school. On the next slide, again following the model that we had, this is a winter to winter comparison, among kids who had scores in fall and winter of each year. And at the middle level, what we see is improvement for most groups. Seeing this here first on the by race and ethnicity, and on the next slide, we're seeing it by program also to a certain extent. On the next slide, we see this for high school also. High school isn't so much gains, but is pretty steady performance for the highest achieving groups shown here for the three highest achieving groups on this slide, and on the next slide showing that for GT identified. So in thinking about these data, we can also consider them in terms of what happens within the year, right? These are winter to winter comparisons. But on the next slide, what we show are comparisons about meeting the performance levels from fall into winter, where the same performance levels were assigned on different tests. This is middle of the level, right, where we thought we had bigger gains, and we think this picture lays that out, knowing we have to have some caution when we interpret these. Whereas in high school, we're also on the next slide seeing gains, just not to the same extent for sure as middle level.
I have a question about the high school and what we can infer here, because we just talked about how we're not quite at high school yet for consistency in what is being taught. So if what's happening in the individual schools is not consistent, what are we hoping to infer from the results of the test?
Great question, because high school is also more complex with so many kinds of language arts classes offered.
I think sometimes you look at data to make sure it's just, something horrible isn't happening. I mean, to the extent that if we saw some horrible, troubling trend, we could intervene, right? As we move forward and we think about trends over time and how we expect these things to go, they become more predictable, more reliable, the more data sets you pair year after year. So I think that we show this, number one, to show that we're giving it.
We're being transparent.
We're giving the assessment, right? Nothing horrible's happening. You could see, you want to be careful of what you're interpreting, and what that might be related to. Kids are not doing worse, right? They're doing either the same or slightly better. And in the middle school, I think that the slide before, that's more promising, right? Which, those are pretty significant jumps in kids moving through from at to above grade level or below to at. I would doubt that most kids are, maybe some, but jumping from below to above, unless they just blew off the first one, which happens from time to time. So.
Well, you give it, Alex.
So given that when we see some, it might just be to hope that something horrible isn't happening. On the slide, 2 slides back, when we look at performance for high school, like Asian, Black, Hispanic, 2 races, and white, I know our NSAIDs on Black, there is 60s. Sorry, minus
67. Yes.
67, that's what I thought. But that's a significant loss there. So is that something that we're pulling out of this data and looking at? Or is that N size too small for it to be?
What is that, like 7 kids, 8 kids?
Well, so the challenge, there are many challenges. What we've most of all want is for teachers to look at these data on individual students, which I believe is a process that's happening. And there are teachers who use these data as part of their educator effectiveness work, right? So there are some targets that can be set and measured. So I believe teachers are looking at these data and using them to make some stats. I don't know that with an N of 67 across all of our high schools, if we would credibly be able to try to pinpoint reason or cause of the pattern. And while that number is big, at some point we would have some. I'm not entirely sure of how unlikely that number is due to chance. It isn't a super likely number, but it might not be unlikely as we might think. To Alex's point earlier.
Well, that's where I was going as well. I mean, we're dealing with basically an 8.5% difference for Black students for the middle level and 17% year over year for the high school level. So admittedly, in the high school level, 35% of the kids are different, in terms of the N size change from 50 to 67. But still, I'm left with, there's no way to walk away from this without saying, what's the deal with Black students in middle and high school in terms of their, literacy performance? What do we know about this? Because this is, to Jorge's earlier point, the standing gaps we have between, say, white and Hispanic, or Asian and white, and Hispanic and Black are substantial and large. And it looks like our small Black population is faring poorly in whatever's going on in the last couple of years. So what's the story there? And that could be a story of N is totally changing, there's a different group of students, but it's still it's a worthy question to know more about, where I'm like, okay, what's the qualitative case study explanation that helps me understand this?
Yeah, and I should, look at these a little harder too, as far as we talked about who's taking the test. I believe this year we changed our mid-year requirement. We may have more kids on read plans taking the test this year than we did last year in the matched groups. I'm just thinking about the fall to winter and fall to spring. So I need to look at what's on this.
I think what we can do is let's take a deep dive and see if we can answer some of these questions and get that to the board.
Good news is that our high schools are leveraging data-driven instruction across teams, not 100% of teams, but it's a celebration that our high schools are engaged in data-driven instruction and are bringing common lit data to the table to look at individual students and compare across standards. We have a team who's vetting novels because, as I said, it's much more complex with so many different kinds of LA classes being offered in high school. So it's not the Wild West at high schools, and we are seeing more high schools who are engaged in the instructional infrastructure, utilizing the playbook, the instructional, the BBSD instruction framework. I'm at a loss for words right now because we're in almost at 3 hours. Is being applied. These are strategies that are being utilized at the high school level, and so that's why I started with, we have stories of promise and stories of progress to tell, and it's a promising story in high schools. We're moving in a direction for sure. It's not perfect, and we see in our data, student by student, where we need to change our practices, and we have more and more teachers at the high school who are looking at a student by student view of how are these young people accessing standards, and what do we need to do or change? What interventions do we need to provide? What kind of reteaching do we need to be thinking about? And so that is expanding in high school.
And I think that's going to be where this gets really exciting and interesting to look at 2 years from now, 3 years from now, as Common Lit 360 gets implemented with fidelity at middle schools, and as that instructional infrastructure gets tightened and more aligned through the high school, then you can see are the changes at the system level making an improvement for our students or not? And I think that's, like, some of this data is hard, it's baseline data, there's a lot of wonderings, but for me, I'm like, to look at as we get more years worth of data, and we know when how the system is changing at those points in time, I think that's gonna be a really interesting pieces of information for the board to think through, to know if the strategic plan is working, to know like the curriculum purchases are, having an impact or not, all those kinds of things. I think that's going to be interesting to look at in the years to come.
It's a lot of data today.
Can I say, I mean, just if I understand how this all works, just as likely a story that if you dove in on the black 17.5% gap, it could be that we've done a much better job of identifying kids who need help. So they're now captured in this measure as being a 12th grader who needs assistance. And what do you know? That means their score is going to look worse from one year to the other because we got better at helping them. So that's where I'm like, I have no idea where this is going.
And with ends that little, it might have been a good, a relatively high achieving group of 12th graders of the year before replaced by a larger and relatively low achieving 9th graders the current year. Lots of possibilities. We'll take these.
Thank you for the excellent conversation today. We're standing by for more questions if you have them.
Board members, I know we've asked a lot of questions. Any more questions at the end of this presentation? Thank you. Brains are full of data.
Thank you so much.
No questions, just a few observations. I want to commend our board for your 3 hours of engagement, thoughtful questions, and what's really making me proud is your thoughts and suggestions are sharpening the way that we're doing our work. And I think that when you think about how does a senior staff and a school board work together to do things better for kids, like, I think this is what it is. I'll commend our team for doing an incredible job and for being reflective during today's meeting on, and not letting great be the enemy of good or even okay in some instances, where we press forward with what we have but are open to how to get things better and more dialed in. And just really want to compliment our schools who are embracing our strategic plan. Nothing happens. We can have the best of plans and really bright people presenting really interesting information. And if folks in our schools aren't embracing, understanding, and doing the hard work of getting better as teachers, as leaders, as interventionists, then none of the data moves. So, I mean, these successes are system-wide successes. And I know that we work really hard to continue to go out in schools and promote those folks that are really taking on the tough challenge of getting better. I'm excited. Next month, board members, if you'll remember, our deep dive is actually going to be some school visits, where we're going to be going to 3 different schools. I think we have those finalized, and we've notified the schools this is happening, so I'm not breaking any news here to anybody. Where we'll spend some time. I think we have are we taking a bus?
We have the electric bus arranged.
So we have an electric bus. So we can hang out on an electric bus, and we're going to go to, if I remember, Cole.
Louisville Middle School and Aspen PK.
So an elementary, a K-8, and a middle school. And these are all schools that are in our strategic plan support cohort 1 schools. Except for Cole, who's been a UVA school. And so you'll see one of our longstanding UVA schools and how those efforts over time have not only changed the culture, but have changed outcomes significantly. As a reminder, in 2019, Cole had the lowest growth in the entire school district. And today they're just one of the shining stars of what can happen when adults come together with our infrastructure and our strategy and work, and you'll be super impressed. And then Aspen Creek and Louisville Middle are 2 schools that they're in their first year of really digging into some of the data-driven instructional strategies. And so I think we have about an hour planned at each school with some drive time in between. So I think it'll be great for us to really you'll get to see some of the things that we're talking about. And it won't be perfect, right? If it were perfect, you should question what's happening. So we're being honest.
They're all reversed.
But I'm excited. I want to thank those schools in advance. I'm excited to get out there in some schools with you all to kind of see these things first.
Well, thank you all for your hard work in this presentation. It was great to see all the data, and if there are no other questions, we are adjourned for today.